Welcome to the Safety Action webinar for March 2025. Today, we're going to look at equipment isolation versus LOTO, which stands for lockout, tagout. Not everyone has equipment that needs isolating, but some of our readers and listeners do, so we'll have a quick look at that. We're going to look at the Victorian Psychological Health Regulations, the fines from safety fines in Victoria for last year. I'm Gary Rowe, your host today. Andrea Rowe is overseas at the moment, spoke at a safety conference in Rome earlier this week, and we'll hear a lot more from her at our next monthly webinar. Before we get into today's topics, I'd like to pose a couple of questions for you, and we'll come back to the answers at the end of this segment. Question one, doesn't matter whether this is at work, by the way, or at home. Why do Phillips type, which are the star type screwdrivers, often round off the screws instead of removing them? I don't know if anyone's experienced a rusted or corroded screw, been in for many, many years. You're trying to get it out and they round off. And I'm going to give you the answer to that at the end of this segment. Another one that's been posed to us once again, it comes up periodically, but posed to us again only in the last few weeks. If you place a warning sign on a piece of equipment or part of a workplace, are you more liable? As some people may allege, the sign only proves that you knew about the hazard or defect and you didn't fix it. So there's something for you to contemplate. You may have heard this or similar statements yourself from time to time, and we'll look at the merits of that and what that means for you and I on a day-to-day basis. I've got three questions today. Another one is, which has also come up in the last couple of weeks. Question three, are the must items in Australian standards legal requirements? If anyone's read an Australian standard of recent times, you'll have noticed in some sentences they say you may do something, and in other areas they say you must do something. So people have read this and say, well, must in our normal English language is mandatory. So is this a legal requirement that we must actually do this thing? I'll come back to this and I'll explain. So let's kick off our main topic for this month. For those that have equipment that you might need to be isolated from time to time, this can also apply to a lesser extent to like an office area, broken chairs, faulty photocopier, faulty kettle, faulty toaster, or whatever you may have. However, most people apply equipment isolation for larger pieces of equipment. So let's have a look. The term LOTO is often used instead of equipment isolation, merely because it's easier and quicker to say. And I'll show you what the differences are and whether that's okay or not. So isolation is the process where you identify and disconnect the sources of potentially harmful energy. The one that comes quickly to mind on almost every piece of equipment is electrical supply. So you want to identify the isolation switch, not just the on-off switch, but a true isolation switch. You'll know they're different because they're capable of being locked off. They've got a little hole in it for the padlock to go through it. So if it doesn't have that, it's not an isolation switch. So for most bits of equipment, we know they're going to have power, so we're going to have an isolation switch, or we go to the switchboard and isolate the circuit breaker. So we've now isolated the power, and if it has got mechanical action or movement, we might need to put in some locking pins, and then you'll tag and lock it out. So that's the process of isolation. So LOTO, which merely stands for lockout, tag out, is part of that process. So it involves physically securing and tagging the isolation points. So you might have an electrical isolation point, a compressed air line, and you've got a valve, and you turn that off and lock and tag it out as well. So LOTO, but if someone says, I've LOTO'd the machine, we know they mean they have isolated it and applied lockout tagout. But most of us just use shorter term language, and it's largely okay for people to say, I've done lotto, when in fact they mean they've done full machine isolation, as outlined here. So what I'm going to explain to you now is the criteria when you should apply full machine isolation, or lotto if you want to call it that, and also the 6-step process to actually carry out machine isolation. So let's have a look. So the principles. No machinery intervention until equipment is isolated, and this would include portable power tools. We not only turn it off at the switch, because that's not an isolation switch, that's a rocker switch on off. We generally pull the power lead out. So now we've fully isolated. So no machinery intervention until equipment's isolated. Only trained and authorised personnel should isolate equipment. So if we're talking about fixed plant and machinery in your business, we should have appropriately trained people, and they're the ones authorised to carry out machine isolation, other than just pulling a portable power lead out of a power plug. And the lockout tagout is to be robust and locked so it cannot be removed with the bare hands. So often when we do machine isolation or lotto audits in businesses, I approach whatever's been isolated, and without trying to vandalise anything, I see if I can pull the isolation off and turn the machine back on. And if I can do that with my bare hands, then your isolation is inadequate. It's defective. So it's got to be robust. And lotto refers to the lockout and tagout. So let's have a quick look at the tags. There are two main types, and you may not have appreciated this. And a lot of people go to the safety shop and they buy a box or a set of tags, and they might be the yellow caution tags on the left, or you might have bought the black, red and white tags. And now somebody's asked a question. I'll come back to that if I may. I'll see if I can find that question for you about the master locks that I just saw pop up. So thank you for that. And some people just buy a packet of the red personal danger tags. So I'll just show you. So these are the two main types. So you've got a caution out of service, and you've got what we call personal danger tags. And so and you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner an example of one pre-filled out with a photograph of a person. And so businesses that use a lot of machine isolation, the key maintenance staff have their own personal danger tag already filled out with their details, their phone number, and possibly their photo. And so they just place it on, and it minimises the documentation and bureaucracy of the machine isolation process. So let's now look at the detail between the two types of tags, shall we? So the yellow tag, often referred to as an equipment danger tag, EDT. So this is a caution out of service, is applied to prevent reuse or unwanted use of equipment. So it could be a broken swivel chair and one of the wheels has broken off the chair, and if someone sits in it, they may tip over and bang their head or injure themselves in some way. So we can apply this to large plant and machinery, or in fact to faulty office furniture and equipment, if we like. So this is the one that would be placed on first, and it shows that the equipment is either unsafe or not to be used for some reason. It may be, for example, past its service interval, and we've just got to stop using it until it's serviced. Now that could be for a car or a truck or some other piece of equipment as well. So there's your caution out of service. It doesn't mean someone's working on it at the moment. It just means we shouldn't use this. And you may, and of course you've got room to put the reason for why it's out of service, who said this and what date. It's nice to turn the tag over and see this is current and valid. We recommend that a no tag be older than 1 year, and that if you're still using the tags after up to 2 years, we think you should consider full decommissioning that piece of equipment. Tags fade, they become unreadable, they become frail and fall off, and that's why we suggest, there's no law on this, a 1 year limit, replace the tag. After 2 years, you should consider, gee, it's been out of service a long time. So the personal danger tags show that somebody's working on the equipment right now. So this is actually very different. I don't know about you, but many people get frustrated by roadside work signage, and it says there's work happening, and it's a 40 km/h speed limit to go past the roadworks because there's workers, but you go past and there's no one there working. And you and I get frustrated only because the signage is incorrect and it's false. Yes, there's roadworks, but there may be no work happening. And so we don't want that frustration to build up or confusion with equipment. So you put the yellow tag on, that goes on first, stays on, and last tag to come off. But as people approach the equipment to work on it, they put their own personal danger tag on. You either have one pre-made up, as shown here at the top of this slide, or you get the blank ones you buy from the safety shop, which you just fill out on the day. So just quickly, name, date, contact details, and the reason why. So there's the two main types of tags that we should be using for machine isolation in the workplace. I'll just see if I can find the question that was posed. But I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the notes. Can you give a belated warning for failure to follow safety procedures? Oh, that was going back to some time. I'm just looking for the trail. It's going to be a Zoom version of the safety planning. I'm like I think we've got some old messages here. I'll try and come back if I can see that message again. I'm not sure who posed it. I'll try and come to your chat. Let's have a look. I'll see if I can find it now. Does a master lock need to be applied to an isolation point if more than one person is working on the mobile plant? Very good question. So thank you very much for that, Brendan. So maybe I should, I'll go back. So here's the first tag that goes on, and that will have, if you like, the master lock, if you want to call it that. So a lock that goes with that tag. Now, as each person arrives, they have their own, not only their own tag, but they have their own lock. So the answer is, there is, if you like, call it a master lock, if you like, certainly the first lotto lock to go on with the yellow tag. That stays there, and each worker brings their own lock and tag, and you may have a what's called a hasp or a lotto box, so multiple people can, if it's a large machine and need to work on it. So hopefully I've answered that. If people need to know more about the isolation process, you can email me or call me another time, and I'll give more information than I'm able to give this morning. But let's see how we go. So if it's a large organisation like a workshop, you might need, or a production area, what we call a lotto station, which is the equipment and tags, so that the people that are trained and authorised can quickly and easily isolate and lock out and tag out a piece of equipment. So you'll have copies of the tags. You'll have possibly a lotto book, just to record. It's just for convenience to know what bit of equipment is locked out somewhere around the factory today, so we can quickly see and know whether it's back online today. You'll see copies of the necessary locks. The middle photograph shows a hasp with multiple holes in it for multiple locks to go on. So different valves might need different brackets, and different electrical circuit breakers have different shapes, and you might need a bracket to be clamped onto that so that someone cannot flick the switch. So that's an example if needed. So each business would look at what their needs are, where your isolation points are, what piece of equipment do you need. Hopefully you've got simple isolation switches and all you need is a padlock to go through the hole on the isolation switch. That would be nice and preferred. So let's look at the criteria. When should we be isolating equipment? And we've got 4 key circumstances. Number one, if anyone removes a fixed panel or non-interlock guard from a machine, and that includes portable electrical equipment, if someone takes out a screwdriver and takes the cover off an electric drill, they're potentially exposing live electrics inside. So we would need to isolate that equipment. So portable equipment will pull the plug out from the power supply, but for larger fixed items of equipment, we find the isolation points, we lock and tag them out. Secondly, if anyone disables any safeguard on some large machinery, there's a manual button from automatic, and you can switch it with a key to the manual mode. And now you can open the interlock doors because we've disabled the interlocks. We've seen some people apply sticky tape to switches inside machines, and it's tricking the machine to think the door is shut when it's not. So if anyone removes a fixed panel, if they disable any safeguard, or if a machine is large and you can get inside it and the door shut and someone start the machine, then people could be harmed because now they're inside all the safeguards. That particularly relates to large equipment. The ones we see most commonly that fit this criteria entering a machine is if you've got a warehousing operation and logistics centre with a palletizing machine. So the pallets go past a light beam, but once a person can stand on the conveyor and walk past the light beam, but the machine can be started after that person has walked inside the machine. So palletizers is one of the most common things we see. And finally, if somebody reaches through interlock doors, but now they've got tools in their hands and they're going to disassemble something, they might pull a panel out, access live electrics underneath an otherwise guarded area. So these are criteria. They remove a fixed guard. They disable an interlock that we've got. It's a big machine and I can get inside, or I come with tools through that interlock door, but I'm disassembly and I can now get into some. There's your 4 criteria. That's it. So if you've got any of those circumstances, your team now know it's a yes, no answer. I need to have isolated this machine. And you can audit your team walking around and say it meets that criteria. Why was it not all isolated correctly? So we've got a process to follow. So let's look at the 6 steps. Now I've determined it meets one of those criteria. I need to isolate the equipment. So 1, you shut down and cordon off the work area before you start. So now we've made a safe workplace. We identify all the sources of hazardous energy or movement. And if it's a large machine and you've got a competent business, hopefully what you will have is what we call a lotto diagram for each machine. So if it has multiple sources of energy, ideally they should have what we call a lotto diagram. And what that will do is diagrammatically show where each of the isolation points are for your piece of equipment. So as I said, particularly for large pieces. So we identify all the sources of energy. We isolate the hazardous energy source. This often is turning a valve off, turning a switch off, and obviously what's going to follow that is you release any stored energy. So if I turn off a compressed air line and I shut the valve, I've still got compressed air in the system, and the machine may continue to activate 1 or more times, even though I've shut off the original supply. So generally there will be a button or another lever to actually release the compressed air. We then install the isolation locks and tags, and we now do the lotto part of the machine isolation, the lotto. And the final step, what we're going to do is test effectiveness and update the lotto book. So by testing effectiveness, you might go back now because we've done this correctly. Everyone's clear, push the start button, and that will to ensure or operate control levers to make sure there's going to be no harmful movement or the machine is not going to start. This is the test that we have isolated the correct piece of equipment. Some people have gone through this process, but for whatever reason have isolated the wrong isolation switch. So they've locked and tagged something out, but wasn't for that piece of equipment. So the final step, test that it's effective, is really important. So that's a quick summary of machine isolation versus lotto and how they fit together. Just briefly on the Victorian psychological health regulations. Many of you will know, and I think we reported it in earlier safety webinars, that Victoria had released draft psychological health regulations, but they were only out in draft. And then it went quiet and it sat there for another year. Well, we've had an announcement from the government. They're going to release the psychological health regulations again. I personally don't know whether they're identical to the earlier version or whether they've taken this time to redraft them. What I can tell you is the Victorian psychological health draft regulations released earlier were the most comprehensive, complex and demanding of all states of Australia. So most other states merely endorsed that psychological health should have a risk assessment and put in proactive controls. And that's about all they've said in the other states. But Victoria was the most prescriptive as to what had to happen for each of the classes of psychological hazards. So they described, I think it was 6 categories of psychological hazards. So you had to effectively do a risk assessment on each 6 categories in each part of your business. So we'll find out shortly. We'll see that they're going to be released soon. They will include things like bullying, sexual harassment, aggression, violence, and exposure to traumatic events or content. And so we need to consider this for our team as appropriate and have some appropriate controls in. So we're advised they plan to pass these regs in October to commence by the end of this year. That's the plan. I still haven't seen the draft regs out yet. So hopefully by next month, we will have this, but we'll be able to have reviewed it for you, summarised it, and tell you the key things you need to do out of it if they've been released. So hopefully we'll have that for you next month. Andrea put in this little segment for me and also in our newsletter. The total safety fines in Victoria last year for 2024 totaled in the order of about $13 million. Now, WorkSafe put this out as a news release, thinking it's probably a lot. I don't know what you think, but I think 13 million across the whole of Victoria doesn't look like a lot of fines or excessively high levels. I'm only going on if the fines are potentially $3 million for a serious breach of the Act, then 13 million across the whole of Victoria for the whole year. Clearly, people are not getting $3 million fines or $1 million fines. They're using a lot lower levels of the available out of what is the maximum fines that are available. But just looking at the stats briefly, which is offering some interest. So there was nearly 120 prosecutions across Victoria. 17 were for unsafe machinery. We just spoke about isolating machinery, how to work on it safely. So that might come under that. 14 people were crushed between objects. So this could be a moving piece of mobile plant and equipment, and they've been crushed against a wall or against another vehicle. I don't know the detail. 12 related to workplace fatalities, which is unfortunate. So 12 of the prosecutions were follow-on from workplace fatalities, and 10 involved mobile plant and equipment, which is probably most commonly forklift activity. And the one thing I can say, if you have forklifts in your business, you need to understand, in my opinion, these are high risk, and you need really good controls and assurance that you've got safe pedestrian safety zones around your forklift trucks, because we're relying on hopefully good, well-intended people and trained and competent, but we're still relying on humans to drive a forklift, and humans who may be walking around and in the vicinity of forklifts. And if any one of those make an innocent mistake, you have a serious injury or fatality. So that's broadly the breakdown of the prosecutions and the categories. You might want to give that some thought for your business and what might pose a risk. So let's come back to our 3 questions. So why do Phillips type screwdrivers often round off the screws instead of removing them. So number one, they're actually shaped, and they're Phillips screwdrivers, which are the star screwdrivers, which we'd normally understand as a star-shaped screwdriver, were originally designed and engineered so that the worker could not apply excessive torque or force to the screw. So they were designed that the screwdriver would round off and fall out of the hole if you tried to apply too much force. So that was what they were engineered to do. So it was part of a manufacturing design intent. Now you and I come across an old screw, been there for 10, 20 years, rusted in place, you want to get it out, but the Phillips head screwdriver, you'll see in the image on screen, has a shape which doesn't allow it to grip as well into the grooves as the one on the left got, which is titled JIS, which stands for Japanese Industry Standard. These have look similar, but they're slightly different shape and profile. And the JIS, Japanese Industry Standard screwdrivers, go deeper into the Phillips screw and will allow more torque to be applied. And so I'm told if you just buy a set of JIS screwdrivers, so if you go to Bunnings or one of the other hardware stores, buy the JIS, they will do the same for all the Phillips, but they'll also work on the JIS screws as well. So you only need one set, but the best ones for you and I is a normal for your workers or for at home, JIS. So that's why they do it. They were engineered to prevent excessive force or torque being applied during manufacture, but we're not manufacturing typically. We're trying to get these rusted screws out, and we wonder why they won't come out and they just round off. So there you go. Question 2, could apply anywhere. Sometimes I see warning, the photocopy is broken, do not use. You see caution, slippery floor, and people tell me, oh, these are not giving you any protection, and you're only more liable because you now know that the floor was slippery. So let's just have a quick look. Basically speaking, particularly 24-hour operation hospitals, supermarket, shopping centres, they don't shut. So there's no time at which they can do normal cleaning. Plus, every business can have spillages and therefore would need to clean even during occupation and use of the building. So if you and I came around the corner and there was a wet, slippery floor, you and I would be very annoyed if they hadn't put out a warning sign. Similarly on the road, if you come around a corner, the council knows they've got a real serious deep pothole and they don't give you a warning sign before you get to that corner, you would not only be angry, you'd be looking to sue the local council for negligence for how they've operated that part of the road and to failure to give you a warning. So let's be clear. Warning signage is appropriate and we need to use it, and don't ever tell somebody don't put a sign out. However, the second part is you can't just put a warning sign out and not fix the problem. So a warning sign is appropriate for interim, short-term things in particular. So things that have broken, failed, have become suddenly unsafe for whatever reason. And sometimes there'll be ongoing hazard, excuse me, and you might see a warning sign on stairways to use a handrail. It's not broken. It's just a nice reminder that people walking downstairs that use a handrail are less likely to have a serious fall. This is well-known statistics. So people who are not using the handrail are more likely to suffer serious injury if they slip, trip or fall on a flight of stairs. So that as another example. So you've got your short-term, something's broken, something's failed, some pothole in the road, then we need to give urgent temporary warning, and that's appropriate. And we're going to fix it as soon as we can. The others may be some ongoing just hazard if you don't use the environment fully and correctly. So they're giving you a reminder for correct procedure. So I think if somebody's only putting warning signs out and not fixing the problem and have no intention of doing so, I think maybe our statement today has some merit. But I think in most cases that you and I would contemplate in the workplace, warning signage is not something that will create more liability for you or your business. And we're coming up to the end of our time. So my final question is the may and must words in Australian standards. So the first thing I can tell you is that no one can ever be charged with a breach of an Australian standard because they are not law. They are not the regulations. So therefore, the word must is not a legal requirement. When you see the word must in Australian standards, they are not a legal requirement. If you see it in a set of regulations, then the answer is yes. If it's in the OHS Act or regulations, must, that is a legal requirement, but that's because it's in the law. So Australian standards are not law. They provide good guidance on safe practice and best practice. And so we should seek out appropriate standards and we use them where appropriate. But you are not legally bound to follow every one of the must. So just briefly, if somebody wants to manufacture, say, portable ladders, and they want to put the sticker on their ladder that it meets, for example, as shown here, AS 1892, which is the Australian standard for portable ladders. If you want to apply that sticker, you have to apply to Standards Australia for permission to apply that to your product, and you have to prove that your ladder in the design and manufacture has satisfied all the must items. So the must is a requirement for you to claim that you're in compliance with that relevant Australian standard. So that's what the must item is in Australian standards. So we're up to the end of our time. Thank you for joining us and for your support as always. If you have any need for audits, inspections, assistance with risk assessments or safety training, we'd love you to give us a call and chat, and we can provide a quote if appropriate and necessary. So thank you very much for that. Andrea will be back for our session next month, and I believe she's going to give us an update on an exciting safety conference that she spoke at in Rome earlier this week. So thank you once again, everyone, and we look forward to catching you next month. Bye.